Craig Newman, welcome to Australian Musician.
Thank you for having me, Greg. It's an honour to be here.
Growing up in the house, was there much music? Were your parents musicians? Did they have a record collection?
No, not really. My parents weren't musical, but yeah, I did discover a little record collection early on in my early teens. Things like Herb Alpert, America, Burt Bacharach albums. Yep.
I believe you began playing on trumpet. What led you to bass from the trumpet?
Well, that was actually, it was going to a tech school that actually introduced me to music when I was 12, I guess. I wasn't really doing great at maths, English, anything like that, and I was fortunate enough to be in a school that had a great music program, a school big band. Somehow I ended up on the trumpet, which was my grounding in music, really. Learning how to read was, that all started then.
Was there a specific teacher that...
George Cadman was he was running the music course at Clayton Tech, and my teacher Max Goldberg, trumpet player, great trumpet player, who was with Brian May and the ABC show band, which I discovered later on, because I ended up playing with a lot of those guys later on as a bass player.
Yeah. So how did you get into playing bass then?
Well, I switched to bass when I was about 15. The bass, I always gravitated to the rhythm section in the school big band. I was playing trumpet and was doing really well, AMEB, exams, all that sort of stuff, but I always gravitated towards the sound. There was something about the bass that caught my ears. And I ended up, after a schoolyard accident with one of my front teeth, I couldn't play for a while. So that was a perfect opportunity for me to jump on bass. And I just sort of self-taught myself for a while, discovering what was on the radio, pop tunes, learning bass lines, then putting together a band at school, just playing Aussie rock tunes and whatever was on the radio.
And what was your first bass?
My first bass was a Kenora, which I bought from, my parents bought for me, from Lamberti Brothers. I think it was about $60 or something. It was a jazz bass. I think it's still in the roof of the bass centre down in South Melbourne somewhere. I had that for a while, and then I moved on.
Yeah. So what were as you began to get into music, what were the albums, the artists you were listening to?
Well, I was listening to, between say 15, 17, most of what I was listening to was just rock, pop music, and AC/DC, Dragon, Thin Lizzy, all sorts of rock stuff. I hadn't discovered jazz or funk or anything like that until I was about 17 or something.
Yeah. And when did you start noticing bass players and start getting inspired by bass players?
Yeah, well, that's what turned my world around, actually, like discovering session players. I was buying albums, and I was very keen to know who was playing on them, who was singing on them, and that led me down the path of research into all these players. And there was a great scene around Melbourne happening at that time, which there was a lot of live TV, so I would spend my nights watching live TV shows with big bands, the Graham Lyle show band, which I ended up playing with, later on, again, on bass. But one of my bass teachers was doing a lot of those TV gigs. Wonderful man called Bob Arrowsmith, who's no longer with us. He was in all of those bands. So that was something that I always, for some reason, gravitated towards as well. And I ended up doing years and years of live TV, and it wasn't anything that I was chasing. It just happened, like a lot of my life. But that was very inspirational, seeing live musicians on TV. And then you had people like Lee Simon, Night Moves, playing TV shows. You'd watch, you'd see bands playing live, yeah. All of that.
Yeah. And what about some of the American session players, Stanley Clarke? Were you into that sort of thing?
Absolutely. I discovered Stanley Clarke when I was about 17. I was getting bass lessons off a guitar teacher, Mark Woolridge, his name was. I think he was teaching at Glen Waverley Music Store or something. So I'd go around to his house. He was a guitarist, but he kind of got me started on bass. And he introduced me to Stanley Clarke. I think School Days had just come out or something. He said, "Oh, you should have a listen to this stuff," and that kind of blew my mind. Yeah, Stanley Clarke. Another great album that inspired me was his double live album, "I Want to Play for You." Yeah, all that stuff was. I'd never heard bass like that before. It was the same as the first time I heard Jaco Pastorius. What is this? I'd never heard it before. And that kind of led me down a path to study jazz and just made me realise that there was a lot of other music out there apart from what I'd been listening to for a couple of years. Yeah.
You did have a formal music education at the Vic College of Arts.
Yes. Well,
how has that knowledge come in handy?
Well, prior to going there, I found a great teacher called Jeremy Alsop, who also studied with Bob Arrowsmith, the guy that I was talking about earlier. And Jeremy was, because at that stage I was going around, I was riding my bike around. I lived close to the Village Green, and they had great Aussie bands on, Friday, Saturday nights. That was my Friday, Saturday nights. So I'd go down there. I got to meet John Farnham's band, which at that time was the great Mike Clark on bass, David Jones on drums, Sam C on guitar, Sam McNally on keyboards, and then the Cupples band was down there with Virgil on drums. So all these great musicians. Anyhow, long story short, I ended up studying with Jeremy Alsop, and he kind of introduced me to Jaco Pastorius and all this Charlie Parker stuff that I never heard of. So I'm busy learning, and all that stuff. And Jeremy suggested, well, you should think about the College of the Arts, which I had no idea about. At that time, I left school at 15, so I was playing. I couldn't make a living out of music, so I ended up doing an apprenticeship. So I was doing an apprenticeship between, say, 16 and 20. I completed the whole apprenticeship. But by the time I was halfway through that apprenticeship, I was already out gigging 2 or 3 nights a week. And then I think I went to the college at about 80. I think I graduated there at 85 or 86. So yeah, I was in mid-80s. I was there for 3 years, and what that did was it introduced me to a lot of different musicians that were trying to do the same thing as me. So I ended up playing a lot of jazz gigs, fusion gigs, and I met Darren Ferrugia at the college, and we've been playing together non-stop since then in many. Obviously the Hey Hey band, but we also had a great instrumental band together, and we grew up together listening to the same stuff. Yeah. Session players, LA, all those players.
So having that education, I mean, you play musical theatre, would you be able to do that without that education?
Yeah. the music theatre thing's just it's a reading gig, it's a focus gig, it's being able to follow conductors, which I do, I work with the MSO a lot, Melbourne Symphony, different orchestras, so I've had a lot of experience at following conductors and working with click tracks. And the college was more about studying jazz and that sort of stuff. Yeah.
First time music took you overseas?
That would have been Kylie Minogue, Rhythm of Love tour. That would have been in the crazy 90s, where there was a lot of happening. Yeah, I toured in her last Australian band, I think it was, the Rhythm of Love tour, which went for, it was spread out over 2 years. So we did UK, Japan, Australia, New Zealand. Yeah, that would be the first time. Yeah.
So was that?
And I would have been. My daughter was just born, Celeste, and I remember having to leave to go overseas on that, which was fairly daunting. That was a big tour for me. I hadn't done that kind of stuff before, and at the same time, I was still doing Hey Hey in Melbourne, and I had a lot of other stuff going on in Melbourne as well.
Yeah. So that Kylie band, was that basically the Farnham band at the time?
No, that was a different musical director. That was a lovely keyboard player called Adrian Scott. And he got me in that band, and we also did a lot of work for Roll in Japan in the 90s. As I had a band with Jerry Pantazis, Simon Hosford, and Adrian Scott, Jennifer Ellis, and we would tour Asia doing demos for Roland. Yeah. So how I got into the Kylie band was through Adrian Scott, yes.
Yeah. And what about the Farnham band? How did that come about?
How did that come about? Well, in my wildest dreams, I wouldn't have ever thought I would have ended up doing that gig. But again, it was just one of those things where I got a call from John's musical director, Chong Lim, who I go way back with. And he was actually my best man at my wedding. I got a call. John's bass player had just kind of resigned or left, and John had a couple of gigs in Paris in a couple of weeks' time. So I got a call to say, well, do you think you can do these gigs in Paris? I said, yeah, sure, okay. So that was basically my audition, but at the same time I was made aware of the fact that a lot of bass players around the country had heard that Joe had just resigned from the band, so there was lots of calls coming into the Wheatley office about auditions and stuff. So I was very lucky to go over there. I didn't. I just had to memorise all the tunes in 2 weeks. I didn't have a rehearsal with John. I had a quick rehearsal with the band in Melbourne, and then hooked up with John over at Soundcheck in Paris. We were just doing a couple of private corporate gigs. And played those gigs, and I remember coming off stage, and I always remember John backstage just came up and put his arms around me and gave me a big hug and said, "Don't you ever leave my band." So and I've been there. That was in 2002, I think. Yeah. And straight after that, there was the Lifetime tour, which went for like a year. It was huge, right around the country, all the regional shows, and
Jerry Lewis is someone you backed as well.
Lewis. Yep, incredible. Yes, yep. How did that come about? Well, it's like I mean, I just, because I can read, and I was part of the Hey Hey band with Darren. We would get a lot of calls to do things like Jerry Lewis, Thelma Houston, who I worked with a lot. Different overseas artists would come into town with their musical director, but would have to pick up a rhythm section, and it would always, I would quite often get the call to do that, and I think that's how that came about. And I did a couple of tours with Jerry, and then he got sick up in Darwin and things happened. But yeah, that was great. And he came out with his own keyboard player who was the musical director, and he also brought out his own drummer. Lovely old man called Chiz Harris. And yeah, I found myself playing bass with him. Incredible.
Yeah.
You know.
Along with the drummer, the bass player is a very important part of the band as the rhythm section.
Oh yeah, definitely.
You've played with a couple of drummers very regularly, Jerry Pantasis and Darren Ferrugia.
Yeah, I love them both dearly. They're incredible.
How do they differ, and how noticeable is the style of a drummer when you're playing with them?
Well, I mean, first and foremost, they both play the tunes that need to be played. They play the parts that need to be played. They're incredibly versatile, both of them, and their timing's incredible. And they listen, and it's all about being part of a band. No one's there to show off. It's just about, let's make this happen. We've got a short space of time. We maybe have one rehearsal, and then we've got to make this happen. And playing with either of them, I just feel very blessed to be able to play with them, because I don't have to think when I play with them. They're just there. Yeah.
You've done a lot of recording. How do you like to record your bass parts?
Recording for albums?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's changed a lot over the years too. I mean, you know, I can spend a few days in the studio with artists recording, or in the last 8 years I do a lot of bass tracks here, and I'm sent parts. If I'm in the studio, obviously a lot of the time I'm in the studio with the core band, which might be drums, guitar, keys, bass, so we can actually try out ideas. And it's nice to be in a room with the musicians that you're tracking with, but that doesn't happen as much these days. And most of the time I go direct through a good DI. Sometimes I mic up an amp depending on what the project is. Yeah.
You've become somewhat of a producer as well. You do stuff here.
I wouldn't say that. I mainly just do bass tracks here, and I write a bit here. My daughter lives here as well, and she's a songwriter, so she sings a lot here, records a lot here as well. So we share the studio. Yeah.
Let's talk about basses.
Basses.
Tell me about the one you're holding.
The one I'm holding I found in Sydney when I was up in Sydney working with Wilbur Wilde. I played in his band a lot in the late 80s. A great jazz band called Wilbur Wilde's Blowout, which kind of led me down the path of a lot of jazz, and there was a lot of great players in that band. You know, Paul Grabowski, David Hirschfelder, Mark Fitzgibbon. Anyhow, I ended up in Sydney playing at the Basement in Sydney with Wilbur, and I'd always heard about this great bass shop up in Sydney, the Bass Player, I think it was called, or the Bass Centre. So I went straight down there after sound check and ended up with this. Yeah, I've been looking for a maple neck jazz bass for many years because I was listening to a lot of Marcus Miller at that time, and that's kind of what he played. So I was on a mission to find a good 4-string Fender maple neck, which is what this is. And I was lucky enough to find it there, and I've had a lot of work done on it since then. It's nothing original, but it's well worn in. That was a new body that I put on it, and it's, you know, I've worn out a lot of it over the years. Yeah.
So is it versatile? Can you use that for anything that you're doing?
I can, but a lot of the time I go for a 5-string if I'm taking one bass. So, and that was another mission. Am I allowed to show you that bass or not?
Yep.
Okay. I was always trying to find a 5-string that was based around a Fender 4-string. So, where is it? Okay, now, I've got a few, but I had this one. I've been following this Luther in New York for many years called Roger Sadowski. Yeah. Okay. I've been following his career ever since. For as long as I've been following Will Lee, Marcus Miller, because he was the guy that fixed all the basses. And so I was lucky enough to be in New York in 2009 doing a show over there, and so I had some time off. I stayed in New York for a couple of weeks after the gig, and had some lessons, and went and met Roger over at the shop, walked the Brooklyn Bridge and found the Sadowski shop, and I got him to make this up for me, and he sent it. It arrived in the mail about 4 or 5 months later. Yeah, so it's based around the 4-string, but with the 5th string. So when I change from 4 to 5, there's a very similar feeling. So I've used this a lot. Yeah. 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 That's how this one came about. And then I've also got the custom Warwicks, which were made for me in the when I was doing the Hey Hey It's Saturday gig. Yeah. Yeah.
Can we talk about the upright bass?
The upright. Sure. Yeah. What would you like to know? It's about 120 years old. I found that at Ben Puglisi's over in Hawthorne. Great bass. I love it. It's not my first bass, but I've had it for about 15 years, and yeah, it's lovely. Yeah. It's beautiful.
What do you generally do in regard to amplification on stage?
That depends on what I'm doing. Like if I'm doing Farnham shows or Russell Morris shows or any of those big touring things, the back line is usually supplied. I normally use an Aguilar rig. And if I'm doing like theatre, everything's DI'd. A lot of in-ear monitors these days, so a lot less carting around of amps than I used to do. Yeah.
Yeah. Have you ever got into effects much at all?
Yeah. I've got a filing cabinet full of effects, and I've got a basic pedal board there with my basic pedals. But depending on what sort of gig I'm doing, if I'm doing a funk instrumental gig, I might take out an envelope filter and octave pedal. Change it up depending on what I'm doing, but mainly, no, not a lot of effects. No.
Tell me about your current work. What have you got happening?
I have been doing quite a bit of theatre work for the last few years. Not full time. I'm just stepping on a lot of shows. So I might do 2 or 3 shows a week, which is perfect for me because it enables me to still do my other gigs that I want to do. That's what I have been doing. The last show I did was Sister Act, and for the first time in a long time, I'm taking on the bass chair on a new musical that's coming to Melbourne. It's never been done in this country before, called Beetlejuice. That opens next month. That's like 8 shows a week for 5 months. But again, I will have 1 or 2 deps on that because I'm also going out with Russell Morris again in August for his farewell tour. And this is like a 10-piece band with a 50-piece orchestra, and it was all arranged. I mean, Russell's got a 50-year catalogue of incredible music, and it's all been rearranged and orchestrated for the orchestra by David Hirschfeld. And we did this tour for the first time 2 years ago, and it was very successful. And he's going out again in August, so looking forward to that as well.
What are you most proud of in your music career?
Well, let's see. Look, I'm really proud of what I've achieved. I've achieved a lot more than what I could have ever dreamt of. You know, I like the challenge of playing all styles of music. I've had the chance to do that. I'm still doing it. I'm still learning and working with a lot of great musicians and singers. You know, I've worked with the best singers in this country, and that's been an honour. You know, I'm very proud of that. Yeah. And my family. You know, that's keeping it all together. It's a big job.
Yeah. Right, Craig Newman, thank you for your time.
That's it. Cool.